And we are back. The CVB Central podcast rolling right along into the month of July, into live period weekend. It was Peach Jam all week long out in Augusta, South Carolina, or in that general vicinity. Um, Tons of talent, as always, at that event. Wish I was going to be there. Hope to be there next year. You never know, Brad. Might have to just make the trip. It's just such a special event. And, it's something to talk about in the basketball world, which is always nice.
Yeah, I wasn't able to watch much, but from a college basketball perspective, I think the most important part is finding out, which coaches were watching who. Right, I saw Dan Hurley and the full staff were there for Cliff Amarui, who's like a top 60 center. I saw teams. Hunter Dickinson had like a who's who of coaches watching him. There was there was like Boeheim sitting next to Coach K and sitting next to a Juwan Howard. It was like a who's who on the sidelines. So I think the most interesting part is watching who the coaches are watching, try to get a feel for who is being heavily recruited by which schools.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of fun things to be done when watching the coaches who are watching. These games are streamed on a Twitch stream with one camera that often doesn't come through very clearly, and you're like trying to pick out what coaches are there because you see the tweets obviously, but you're trying to see and as like a Siena fan, like there's a ton of tweets that come out about who Siena's watching. Sometimes you get thrown in at the end of a list, but oftentimes it's Duke, Kentucky, Vanderbilt all here for, this guy, and, Siena's looking at, their backup wing or like their starting point guard, whatever. That could be a huge recruit for Siena, but just isn't relevant nationally. So you don't see it. So you're like looking, you're like, who is is that nondescript balding guy Siena's head coach, or is that UAlbany's head coach, or is it any of the other, 700 college basketball coaches who are white and almost bald? So it's kind of fun. To watch the coaches, watch their reactions. It's just kind of following through the thing. It is a grind, I'm sure, for those coaches. I mean, just out there all day, watching player after player. I think one of the bigger kind of noteworthy things that happened was the Duke offer for DJ Stewart, who I really like. He's a skinny combo guard who can really, really score. He's just one of those guys you turn on and he's immediately just trying to get a bucket, always going downhill, always aggressive, can really create shots off the bounce. I thought he was impressive in the games for Mean Streets that I watched. I watched them play Team Takeover early in the week. I thought he was really good. So that'll be an interesting recruit for Duke, jumping into a more national recruitment early. It looked like, could he stay in state, go to Northwestern Illinois, both who have prioritized him. Texas had jumped in, some other bigger schools, and then he obviously gets the elusive Duke offer, so obviously changes things in his recruitment. And then they had the championship game today. I watched almost all of that, and just first off, I thought it was an incredible game. Really exciting. Two teams, tons of athletes, tons of really high level recruits. You got Namari Burnett, Jalen Green, Devin Askew, Addison Patterson, all playing for Team Why Not, and I'm missing guys, but that's the core. Versus N'Faly Dante, Kennedy Chandler, DeJuan Harris, who just got a Kansas offer. The list goes on for Mocan. So it was a really fun game. Mocan wins it in overtime. And N'Faly Dante becomes a huge name to watch over the next couple of weeks, Brad, as a potential reclassification candidate. Kentucky, Oregon, LSU all in pursuit. But Oregon has a little bit less need for a big guy now that they picked up Shakur Houston. So let's talk about that a little bit, Brad. The biggest name left on the grad transfer market is off the board. His recruitment was weird. It was long. He is headed to Eugene to provide some much-needed front court depth for the Ducks.
Yeah, he averaged 14 and 10 2 years ago for UNLV. This past year, he didn't play the 10 games. He was hurt after whatever 6 or 7 games. So he gets the year back. He's graduating. And I think out of his final list, which was Seton Hall, Grand Canyon, and Oregon, he would have started at all 3 places. And I think if he went to Grand Canyon, we would have to talk about them as a bubble team. But I think going to Oregon had the biggest impact on college basketball as a whole, a positive impact. I think this moves Oregon from like bubble territory to like a team that could easily be ranked in the top 25. I'm still considering ranking them. I think I have them just outside right now. But him sliding in probably at center. They're going to be long. They're going to be athletic, and they get this interior force who can rebound, and then they can kind of bring guys like Francis Okoro and lock War along more slowly.
Yeah, I mean, he can. He's very athletic, as you said. He can handle the ball a little bit, not a ton. He can step out and shoot a little bit. He made 4 threes in 8 games this season. He's best inside. I think that's pretty clear. But he can play a little bit of 4. He can play a little bit of 5. He's played that too big experiment with Brandon McCoy on that disappointing UNLV team in 2017-18. But yeah, it's a huge get. I think you would pencil him in to start at the 5 over Okoro for Oregon. I think it just makes so much sense. He's a little undersized for the 5 spot. He's 6'7", 6'8", but very athletic, very switchable, and it really adds to that Oregon. The allure of Oregon is kind of a switchable team. He can catch lobs from that backcourt that's so good, and Oregon's one of those teams that has the most potential still to rise in the grand scheme of things, just because of all the reclassification options that are still in play for them, and just the number of scholarships in general. But they still have some spots, and adding N'Faly Dante, who'd be a 5-star kid who is really good. Watched him today. Good touch around the basket. Great size, already ready to go physically. Tenacious rebounder. Can't shoot at all, but I mean he'd be a really good 5. You're talking about the potential that also add Addison Patterson. They have 1 or 2 scholarships available. I think that's unclear right now based on I believe they have a guy who might go on a mission. That might be confusing the scholarship count. But they could add one guy, huh?
Isaac Johnson is going to be 2021 now.
So if
at least that's what I read. When he committed.
Okay, so that does clarify things. But they could add at least one more guy, whether that's a wing and Addison Patterson, who's like a nice piece. Didn't really pop comparative to Namari Burnett and Jalen Green and Devin Askew today for Team Why Not, but he'd help that team, and then N'Faly Dante would really kind of change things for this team by being one of the better big men in all college basketball. So juiced in a big lift, but potentially more coming for the Oregon Ducks, and a team that we may have to do a deep dive on later in the offseason, depending on how things move along.
About N'Faly Dante, I think he would fit best on LSU. Similar to when we were saying, or Houston going to Oregon was the biggest impact on college basketball based on his final 3 schools, because Oregon's now moving into a like a whole other tier as like a potential top 25 team, whereas like Seton Hall would move from like 11 to 9, and Grand Canyon would move only to like the top 50 or 60. I think, and N'Faly Dante would have a similar impact to LSU, where their only 2 centers right now, or like even guys who can play center, are Emmett Williams and then Cortez Cooper, who was a red shirt this past year from junior college. He would give them some much needed size inside. And then you look at his other 2 schools in Oregon, who now have Houston, Francis Okoro, who's a former top 75 recruit, who reclassified last year, so he's a young sophomore. And then Locke War, who's like this super late stock riser. And then Kentucky has Nate Sestina and Nick Richards and E.J. Montgomery. I think LSU is where Dante both makes the most sense in terms of a playing time, and in terms of impacting the sport positively.
Yes, I completely agree. I think Oregon is seen as the favorite right now, if I'm not mistaken. But if we're looking at impact on college basketball, as you said, it'd be best for LSU. But we've seen this offseason, Brad. Some guys some guys go to schools that you weren't happy about because it didn't impact college basketball enough. Well, why can't players just commit to the right schools so that we have the most potential bubble?
Yeah, it was like it was like for every one that made sense, we got like one that made absolutely no sense. It's like the Dom Olenicek made a lot of sense going to Florida State, and then like Terrell Allen going to Georgetown made absolutely no sense.
See, it's funny. I was literally about to say Terrell Allen. You were still angry about.
Or like Derek Thornton to Boston College made no sense.
Ryan Woolridge made a lot of sense to Gonzaga, though.
Yeah, and then we have like Cam Justice to Western Kentucky made no sense. John Laurent to Oklahoma State made a ton of sense. It was just like one for one.
Yes. So I think we need to propose a new college basketball rule where Brad and I make all the rosters, and we just sort players by the best fit. We create like a fantasy world where we have a ton of good teams and no great teams.
Yeah, every transfer has to be signed off by me.
Shall we get into our deep dives today, which are Villanova and Cincinnati?
Let's do it.
All right, let's start with Villanova. Can you give us the synopsis before I give you the ins and outs?
Okay, Villanova last year, 26-10 overall, 13-5 in the Big East before being pounded in the second round of the NCAA tournament by Purdue, who we touched on last time. The Wildcats and probably won the Big East regular season after Marquette had absolutely horrific collapse down the stretch, and then Villanova also won the Big East conference tournament as well. 30th in KenPom, 16th in offense, 81st in defense. Interesting note on their two key cogs from last year, Paschall and Booth, who did most of the offensive initiation. So they were on the court a ton, right? Paschall was 51st in percentage of minutes played. Booth was 101st, and they were two of the highest usage guys in the country. Right? Booth was 147th. Paschall was 470th. So if you think about, there's 353 teams. That kind of shows how much they were used. Their combined usage was 51% of possessions when they were on the floor, and they played a ton of minutes. Right, so that those two numbers combined show, that Villanova was the Paschall and Booth show, and those guys, while they are great players, they were thrust into a much bigger role when DiVincenzo and Omari Spellman unexpectedly left early. Maybe people thought Spellman would be a 2-and-done, but no one expected DiVincenzo, especially preseason, or even pre-NCAA tournament, to play his way into the NBA first round. And with both of them, this team's in contention for a national championship. With only DiVincenzo, this team is probably a top 10 team at the very least, because they could really use another scorer. So they were 335th in tempo. Makes sense given that they didn't have any natural point guard and they had very few ball handlers. Their wings like Sadiq Bey and Jermaine Samuels, not guys who are gonna handle the ball too much. Samuels can handle a little bit in the open court. They shot the third most threes in the country, but only 126th in 3-point percentage. Gillespie and Sadiq Bey were their best 3-point shooters in terms of percentage at 38 and 37 respectively. They were 46th in 2-point percentage, but interestingly enough, only one team got fewer points off twos. Kevin, do you want to guess the only team in the country last year to get fewer points off 2-point baskets?
Siena College.
Quinnipiac, whose coach...
Okay, that makes perfect sense.
Coach Baker Dunleavy, former Villanova assistant. Even though that their defense was not great, they did a great job of keeping guys off the free throw line, 297th in points allowed off the free throw line. And then lastly, another big issue for Villanova, the ripple effect of losing DiVincenzo and Spellman. They were 302nd in bench minutes. You have those two, Paschall and Booth playing a ton. Guys like Joe Cremo and Javon Quinterly absolutely flopped, especially down the stretch. Cremo played double-digit minutes every single game until the postseason, including the Big East tournament and the NCAA tournament, where he played single-digit minutes in all 5 of those games. It kind of shows, when it was time to tighten up the rotation, it really showed that he completely flopped for Villanova. And then Javon Quinterly, 5-star recruit. Most people thought he would start at point guard coming into the year. He didn't give them anything. He could have been another source of offense for them had he been integrated more into the rotation. And then Cole Swider, another guy who people thought, myself included, could provide a spark off the bench offensively. He got hurt mid-season, never really found his stride.
I'll throw in one more name of a guy who had some promise, some upside, and truly did nothing for this team, Brannen Slater.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, if you look, I don't remember if we deep dove on Villanova, but we definitely talked about them all off preseason. And we were talking about how Cole Swider is going to be a perfect fit for this offense, and Cremo, can do a lot in the post-up game. He'll be a starter, 10-plus point per game guy. And Javon Quinterly is such an impact player for this team as a 5-star who fits really well for Jay Wright, who's kind of a point guard whisperer at this point. And all of these guys, and it really turned out to be like Phil Booth and Eric Paschall just going out and balling, as you said. Colin Gillespie hit some big shots for them last season. Saddiq Bey really was a saving grace for this team, in my mind, because, with all these guys that disappointed, as we said, Saddiq Bey was a guy I don't think we at all expected to even be in the rotation. And he was, not only good, but I would say, great as a freshman. In terms of expectations, he looks like that type of like elite 3 to 4 year player who can be like an all conference player for a couple of years. Great value for them to land late in the process, and one of those makes you wonder where they get him late after he decommits from NC State because they had a log jam on the wing. They took Eric Lockett over Saddiq Bey. That's tough luck for Kevin Keatts.
Well, looking back at this point last season, right, we were saying, all right, Quinterly is a starting point guard, and Cremo averaged 18 a game at Albany, shot like 45% from three. It would be crazy if you said he wasn't going to average double figures. He was one of the best transfers on the market. He was recruited that way. The numbers showed, the eye test showed. He just completely flopped. And we'd have Booth in the starting lineup, and then Paschall and probably Cosby Roundtree, and then Gillespie was like a fixture off the bench. But then after that, you had Samuels, who was a sophomore who did very little previously in his Villanova career, battled some injuries too. And then you had Slater, Swider, and Bey, who were all freshmen, all wings, and Bey was the lowest ranked by a considerable margin. Swider was top 50, Slater was like top 75. So it was one of those guys was always going to be left out. We just assumed it was going to be the lowest ranked one when actually it was Slater.
Yes. And I think it's an interesting cautionary tale before I get into the ins and outs of this roster is basically, we were so confident, as you said, in what they had. And it wasn't like we were making bets on guys. We were betting on the best grad transfer on the market, a 5-star point guard who, is famous, a great recruiting class with Cole Swider was a high-level recruit. Slater was a top 50 kid, plus bring back Booth, bring back Paschall, bring back Cosby Roundtree. Like, it didn't feel unsafe what we were betting on. And all of those things went wrong, and they still won the Big East. And they obviously weren't as good as we expected them to be. They weren't a top 25 team in Ken Palm, as you said. But it kind of gives a look into how nothing is quite as certain as we expect it to be when we do these deep dives. We try to give you our best insight as we can, but it can be difficult at times. So, Brad, without further ado, the ins and outs I'll bring you right now. So 4 out, 5 in, although... actually 6 in, excuse me, and that will be out being Phil Booth, Joe Cremo, and Eric Paschall all graduating, along with Javon Quinterly transferring to Alabama. In comes Brian Antoine, 5-star recruit, Jeremiah Robinson Earl, 5-star recruit, Justin Moore, 4-star recruit, Eric Dixon, 4-star recruit, Chris Archidiakono, underrated guy who will be kind of a long-term piece of point guard, and Caleb Daniels, the Tulane transfer, sitting out. It is the number 4 class in the 24/7 sports rankings right now. So this is as good a class as Jay Wright has had at Villanova. Robinson Earl and Antoine are the numbers 2 and 3 recruits, respectively, all time in the 24/7 era for Villanova.
Just a broader point first on kind of Villanova last year and in the recruiting class. Reading when these 2 early top 25s have explanations behind their rankings, most of them go with, they bring back X, Y, and Z, even if those guys, they'll like take the two or three best players on the roster, say we we bring back X, Y, Z, and then they add the X ranked recruiting class whenever it's like a top 10 or a top 15 recruiting class. But we see, I looked at the numbers earlier this spring. There is no correlation between recruiting class and then being in the top 25 the next year. It was like, I think it was like 50% of the top 10 recruiting classes were top 20, or no, it was like, I think it was like 50% were top 10 teams. And then like out of the top 25 recruiting classes, it was like it was like 48%. So it's about flip a coin, right? So it's not a great piece of evidence to use in your favor. And I find it really interesting, especially when that was the call people made last year, right? They're bringing in Quinterly, bringing in Swider, right? This highly ranked recruiting class, and it fails, and people acknowledge it fails. And then we see Villanova being ranked sixth, seventh, eighth again this year, similar to where they were last year, ranked in the preseason. And people are citing this recruiting class with Antoine, Robinson Earl, Eric Dixon, Justin Moore. And while this year's recruiting class is better, it's not like that much. I mean, Quinterly was a 5-star. They're not bringing in a grad transfer as good as Cremo was previously. And guys like Swider and Slater were ranked in the same spot as Moore and Dixon are.
Right. I mean, you're just, at this point, if you're betting on Villanova to be, a true national title contender preseason, you are saying, like, for all the misses they had last year, they're having hits. Brian Antoine will not only be healthy but be very, very good. Jeremiah Robinson Earl will be, one of the better big men in college basketball, and I think those things are very possible. We both watched Jeremiah Robinson Earl quite a bit for this U19 team in Greece the last couple of weeks. He's very good. He is switchable. He's the perfect modern big, as you have referred to him many times. But still, I mean, it's still a lot to bet on, especially when you're dealing with the health of Brian Antoine, who had shoulder surgery following his high school season. Per The Athletic, he will not likely be available until at least December and possibly a little longer than that. So, I mean, that's another concerning thing for their blue chip recruit and really the guy you're most confident in going and getting a bucket.
Yeah, so I think first, for some strengths of the team overall, I think that the defense, at least on paper, should be much improved. Right? They were 81st last year, but they had a lot of new guys, right? Because they didn't only lose Omari Spellman and Dante DiVincenzo, like we mentioned. I mean, they lost Jalen Brunson, they lost Mikal Bridges, and while those were expected, I mean, they still lost those guys with eligibility left. So losing those 4 starters, you're thrusting guys like Gillespie, Samuels, Bay into much bigger roles. Cosby Roundtree too. So I think with another year in the system, because these guys are all good individual defenders, especially guys like Bay and Samuels, who have that kind of prototypical versatile multi-positional length. I think the defense should be much improved with all the experience that they got last year, and then the kind of individual pieces. And I kind of mentioned before, I know the strength of this team is there are a lot of versatile pieces. They can mix and match a lot of different ways here. Whether it's sometimes last year they played Jermaine Samuels at the 5. They can do that again this year. They can go big with Robinson Earl and Cosby Roundtree together. Bay can play probably 2 through 4, definitely 3 through 4. Justin Moore is a nice 3-and-D piece. Eric Dixon's another guy who can play that small ball 5. Swider can play multiple positions. A third strength. There aren't really any elite shooters, at least that are proven at this level. But everyone besides Cosby Roundtree is a long-range threat. Swider should come along. Mentioned previously, Bay and Gillespie shot it well last year. Samuel shot it well for a 4/5. Antoine should shoot it well. Robinson Earl can step out and shoot. And then I think that fourth strength would just be like the culture and the coaching and player development, where last year didn't go as planned, but we saw Gillespie and Jermaine Samuels took huge steps. They weren't where they needed to be for Villanova to reach expectations, but nonetheless they took major steps, and I expect more guys to seriously improve this year as well.
Yeah, I think all those are pretty fair. I wrote down for my strengths the coaching and system, the potentially excellent backcourt. Five-star guard in Antoine, a backup in Justin Moore as a top 50 kid, Colin Gillespie, returning guy who's very, very solid. Sadiq Bey, if you consider him a guard, is a very dynamic slasher. They have a lot of potential in the backcourt, and that's not even that's writing off Brannen Slater, which I think is somewhat reasonable based on how little he did last year. But like you said, they're such a good player development team that it wouldn't stun you if he becomes a rotation player this year. And then the defensive versatility, I think, is the other thing that I really like with this group. We have to go through our starters in a second, but I think my projected starting lineup, when everybody's healthy, is Colin Gillespie, Brian Antoine, Sadiq Bey, Jermaine Samuels, and Jeremiah Robinson-Earl. And, I mean, that is an incredibly versatile lineup that can defend multiple positions. Bey, Samuels, Robinson-Earl, all potentially be excellent defenders. Antoine as well. Gillespie's not a very good point of attack defender, but he fights, he scraps. I think he can be useful. I think, to me, that has potential to be excellent both offensively and defensively, as long as Colin Gillespie can effectively run offense, because that's the main question I have with this team. He's going to be their primary initiator. He wasn't that last year. Can he be this year?
Yeah, so I think also in terms of their defense, I think Cosby Roundtree and Justin Moore coming off the bench are also very good defenders. I think the only guy who will for sure be in the rotation who's not known as a great defender would be Cole Swider.
And Gillespie.
Yeah, but he's fine. I think on defense. He's not. But I think he's fine. I have the same starters as you. And then rounding out the rotation, I had Cosby Roundtree at 6, Cole Swider at 7, Justin Moore at 8, and Eric Dixon at 9. I wouldn't be surprised if they stuck to 8. Also wouldn't be surprised if Arcidiacono got some backup point guard minutes, because who else would be the backup point guard? I guess Justin Moore. But I think especially with Antoine out, the rotation gets interesting. I guess they could move Bey to the 2 and Swire to the 3, or they could just slot Justin Moore for Antoine's minutes. But either way, Antoine's the guy that they really need back. You touched on it with Gillespie. At the start of the year, he was handling the ball a lot. He was creating a lot, and things were not going well for Villanova. I think the pen game is where I think it really flipped, and Booth was kind of given more free reign, and Gillespie was moved to where he was kind of better off as like a off ball player who could knock down threes and be more of a secondary creator. And then just in terms of defense too, I think just not having to play a Booth and a Paschall, for 90% of the game, I think that's going to improve the defense a lot as well, because they were required to do so much on offense that they definitely had to compensate on the defensive end energy wise. And hopefully they don't have to play Gillespie and Antoine those type of minutes this year. Hopefully they can spread around more and kind of like in previous years where everyone they had like 6 guys getting like 28 minutes a game, and their defense was elite. When they won the championship, they were like 11th in KenPom on defense.
Yeah, I think I would slot in Justin Moore for Brian Antoine in the starting lineup when Antoine is out with that injury as he recovers from that shoulder injury. I believe he had a torn labrum was the diagnosis. I'm not 100% sure on that. But yeah, they can go bigger. They have the versatility to do that. I'm not super concerned with the depth. I think they will be going 7, 8 guys deep, but I think that's pretty natural for Jay Wright. I don't think he's a guy who wants to use his bench, especially in bigger games. I think the balance for me, with this roster, and I have the exact same bench as you: Moore, Swider, and Cosby Roundtree getting the majority of the minutes at the off the bench, and then maybe Eric Dixon or Arcidiacono, finding minutes depending on how he sees that breaking down. Dixon's an interesting guy. I remember I watched him once. He was playing against Ryan Young on Northwestern commit, so I watched the game of his. He's I don't know how to describe him. He's kind of like Nick Ward, but a little more perimeter oriented. Right? He has that like bruiser lefty, like likes to kind of bang in the post, but if he can do a little bit on the perimeter and face up that Ward couldn't do, I think that's like a solid comp.
Maybe like a Mark Vital.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, he's definitely like their heir to the Samuels Paschall, where he's going to be the small ball 5 eventually. Because Samuel's going to be a junior this year, I think. So, in 2 years he'll be able to take over that. I think he can shoot a little, but he's not like a floor spacer. I think he probably plays. I've heard that conditioning is an issue with him, so that'll be interesting to monitor there.
Yes, that is definitely something to watch. Kind of the bigger questions, though, looking at this roster. As we said, I think we're both pretty, not necessarily concerned, but it's something we're watching for of how does Colin Gillespie operate as a primary initiator of the offense. How can he be ball dominant? Can he run the show and not be a guy who's running off screens and occasionally being put in pick and rolls, but for the most part running off balls, running off down screens, hitting outside shots, being a good good role player. He's a guy who his assist to turnover ratio was about 1-to-1 last year, and I think that's going to have to be better, especially when you're playing with freshmen. Especially if you're going to play Robinson Earl, Antoine, Justin Moore. I'll give them minutes. That's tough on an assist to turnover ratio. Freshmen turn the ball over a little bit more. That's kind of generally something you expect. I mean, Saddiq Bey, especially if he's going to get bumped down to he's a really good small ball 4. He's going to get bumped down to the 3 and then sometimes even the 2. I mean, that's another ball control question. So I think ball control in general, but especially Gillespie as the initiator is the biggest concern for me, followed by Brian Antoine's health. I think that's obviously of the utmost importance because he's a bucket getter on this team. Samuels is an interesting guy. Like you said, kind of in the Paschall mold. But I don't think he's ready to be a high level, bucket getter. Same with Saddiq Bey. Colin Gillespie doesn't create enough separation to do that. It really, to me, feels like it has to be Brian Antoine if this team wants to get to its ceiling, which I think, like we mentioned at the top, is that 6, 7, 8, 9 preseason ranking.
Yeah, I mean, I love Jermaine Samuel's game, especially at the 5. He's such a mismatch. He can get the ball at the top of the key and drive past bigs, and if they give him too much space, he can shoot that 3. I really like Saddiq Bey. He can play the mid post. He can space, with the corner 3s. But neither of those guys have really shown like a consistent ability to create offense. I think Bey would have the better chance this year. But I mean, my top 2 questions for Nova, one, who is going to score, right? Booth and Paschall were big usage guys and created most of the offense. I'm guessing it's Antoine, right? Antoine's hurt, but Antoine to me reminds me a little bit of like Antonio Blakeney. Played at LSU, averaged like 13 a game as a freshman, 17 a game as a sophomore, like 3-level scorer. I think Antoine could be that. He might be a little more athletic than Blakeney. And then second question, Villanova struggled out of the gate when Gillespie was used more aggressively as the primary creator. Can they sustain success with him as the full-time point guard? And that's going to be exacerbated even more with Antoine out. So that's the main thing, because they have a lot of guys who can hit shots, a lot of nice 3rd, 4th best players, but they need a serious best player, and it's going to fall on Brian Antoine's shoulders.
Literally, it might fall on his shoulder.
It's
on Aldi's shoulder. So that's something to watch. And the other thing that's challenging with the injury is it's not like Brian Antoine is just suspended for a month and he's practicing every day. Like right now, he's not playing basketball. Like he is not, he's with the team, but he's not building that chemistry on the floor. He's not, learning the intricacies of this system. I think there's going to be some adjustment, even if he comes back, say, December 1st. I think it's going to take a month, maybe even 2 months for him to be where he is. I think this injury eats into their upside for regular season ranking. It doesn't necessarily eat into what they can be in the postseason. I think this is probably going to be a team that is underseeded in the NCAA tournament based on their talent level and their coaching, just because of that, because they're going to have an injury, because they're going to be a young team still getting better, because they're still working things out throughout the year. I think to me that's something to monitor. Is how do they get better throughout the year? Because I would bet on Jay Wright making this team a better team, in March than they were in November. They were this past year. I think they've been pretty much every year under Jay Wright. He's done a tremendous job, especially of late. But I think that's something to watch. Is are they a better team in March than November? I think they will be. The question is, how bullish should you be in a preseason ranking because of that?
Yeah, a few other questions I had that also kind of, I think really get to this question of upside, and they all kind of stem from the same root issue of who's going to score. And so my third question was, Villanova was more 3-point reliant last year than they have ever been. They were third in points off threes. I went back 5 or 6 years on Cam Hub, and that was the highest for them by far. Is this sustainable long term, especially with the lack of proven creators, right? Because they're not going to have someone breaking down the defense to get threes, at least as well as some teams could, right? So if this team is going to be 3-point reliant, it's going to be a lot of like passing around the perimeter and kind of firing up threes, like run set plays to get threes for guys. So is that sustainable without like a Phil Booth and Eric Paschall creating offense?
Yeah, I think that's a really valid concern. Just because Booth drew so much attention, he get downhill. He was, super good at getting to the rim and finishing. So I think losing that and his ability to pass out of those situations, and same with Paschall's ability to pass out, could impact their ability to run offense. I think that's definitely a valid concern that I'll be watching.
And then two other questions. Question number 4. We mentioned previously that the defense looks good on paper, but last year they were 81st in defense. Can having a year to gel and these guys being in the system for another year, can that improve the defense for guys who look like strong individual defenders? And then lastly, the way the roster looks, we've touched on it multiple times. They look to be super reliant on Brian Antoine, especially, and then Robinson Earl looks to be the starting center, probably going to average 8 to 10 points a game. Can they lead this team as freshmen? The last time that Villanova has been this reliant on a freshman was probably Ryan Arcidiacono's freshman year, which was in 2013, where I think they made the first round of the NCAA tournament as like an 8 or 9 seed and lost. But they were a far cry from the Villanova that they've been since the new Big East. That was the last year of the old Big East. So it's been a while since they've had to rely on a freshman that much.
Yes, no, that's a very valid point.
Because like Jalen Brunson was a starter, but he was the fifth starter. He was the fifth wheel.
Right. He was just kind of a glue guy on that team. He was not heavily relied upon. So looking at their schedule, they have Ohio State in the Gavitt games. I think that's a really interesting game with two teams that have great recruiting classes and great coaches and some returning talent. I think that'll be a really fun game. They'll be at the Myrtle Beach Invitational. That means they'll probably get Baylor. That's another top 25 team. And then the Big East, I think, will be a really balanced league. Seton Hall, Marquette, Xavier, all solid clubs. Georgetown should be in the mix, whatever. The depth of this conference, I mean, I don't even know. There's that Providence team that Brad seems to think might be pretty good. There's the whole thing going. So it's going to be a tough schedule. They'll be tested early. Which will be interesting potentially without Antoine in that Ohio State game in that Myrtle Beach event. So potentially losing out on some chances for big quality wins to build the resume is another thing to watch with the way their schedule works.
Yeah, and then in terms of an X factor for me, I think it's clearly Colin Gillespie. With Antoine out, I mean, he's going to have a huge burden, and he's going to have to do better with the substantial role that he occupied at the beginning of last year.
Yeah, I would say the X factor is either Gillespie or Brian Antoine. I'll take Antoine just for the hell of it, basically, just because of the health. I mean, and how important he is as a scorer. Last year we were really penciling in Joe Cremo to get some buckets for them. He did not do that. It really fell heavily on Phil Booth. and they don't have another guy for it to fall heavily on if Antoine doesn't pan out. It's him or it's nothing. So they really need him to be a consistent bucket getter, which I think he's more than capable of doing. But
I think Swider too. Maybe he could average like 7 or 8 points a game. But again, this is moves around the margins. They need the guy who's going to average 13, 14, 15 points a game.
Agreed. So where do we feel on this Villanova team? What's our consensus is where we should rank them?
Okay, so I have Villanova 3rd in the Big East, 19th overall. I'm probably one of the lowest on Villanova. Where do you have them?
So when I did my top 25 after Blackshear, I had Villanova at 14, which put them first in the Big East, just ahead of Seton Hall. I think with the Brian Antoine injury, I'm going to flip those two. I'm going to make Villanova 15 and second in the Big East. I'm going to make number 1 in the Big East, Seton Hall at 14. I think 15 to 20 range is the right. The 15 to 20 range is the right spot for this Villanova team. I think you can justify them up to about 12. Anything higher is scary, especially with the injuries, especially with the youth. I think, and I read Dana O'Neill's preview in The Athletic. The Athletic's doing a really good series, the state of the program. It's kind of the deep dive in written form that we're doing in a podcast form. They did Villanova last week, so I read over that, and they do all these interviews for these. So they've talked to Jay Wright, and so you almost get the sense when they talk about the ceiling and the floor of this team of what Jay Wright thinks it is too. And Dana O'Neill writes the most reasonable best case scenario would be to coalesce as the year progresses, which would include some early season lumps, fight their way into the second weekend of the NCAA tournament, and start the boulder running for a big run in 2020-21. I think that indicates to me what Jay Wright feels is what where this team can be. He doesn't see this as a national championship type team that some of the top 5, top 10 rankings we've seen have. Yeah,
I always take the coach interviews and the kind of coach things with a grain of salt, because they have a lot of different motivations besides giving like a correct, right? Like Jay Wright has different motivations than we do. Whereas we're trying to look back in April and be right, and he's trying to like get a message across either to the fan base or his team or the media or kind of he has some kind of propaganda or like some point of view he wants out there. So I always take those with a grain of salt. But I think that falls in line of where we have. It's kind of similar to, I think it was Gary Parrish. It was either him or Jeff Goodman on one of their podcasts. Said that they talked to Tony Bennett, and Tony asked them where they were being ranked in the preseason, and they told him like 8th or 9th, and Tony Bennett was like aghast. He was like, 8th? Like, my God. But speaking of the composite, Villanova is 10th right now. We found three more polls since the last time that we podcasted, so we're up to 13 different ballots. They're 10th in the composite. Their average score is 11.38, which is pretty close to the number 11 team, Memphis. They're pretty much tied there. The max is 5th, which is Rob Doster. The low is myself at number 19. They have one of the biggest ranges there from 5 to 19. So the average is lower or higher, really, than what you said that you would be comfortable with them being ranked. Because you said, 15 to 20 you were comfortable with?
I was really comfortable 12 to 20. I thought 15 to 20 is right, but I thought 12 to 20 I could be okay with.
Okay, so they're a touch higher than that. So they have some expectations on them.
And before we wrap up Villanova, of course, we have to touch on, state of the program, Jay Wright, where do we stand? There's really nothing to say here. They're in great shape. They are in amazing shape. They have a new facility. They have, they're recruiting at a super high level. They have one of the best coaches, if not the best coach in college basketball, who has no, indications that he's looking at leaving, whether for the NBA or for college. I mean, they are in about as good a shape. If you said, oh, you can go be a fan of a program right now, choose a team. It doesn't have to be at all, related to where you grew up, what your associations are. I think Villanova would have to be right at the top of your list. They do things the right way. They play a fun style. They've got a great coach. They are everything you want in a college basketball program, and there's no reason to suggest that would change anytime soon.
And I saw Villanova fans last year saying that last year's team was boring and they didn't like the team and it was so disappointing. I mean, they won the Big East. They made the second round of the tournament, and I mean they were outside the top 25 in KenPom, but essentially they were a top 25 team. I mean they were seeded that way. I mean, come on.
Yes, I mean they were. I would say a bit unrealistic with their expectations.
Well, I mean, they weren't the only ones because everyone had them last year between 7 and 10. I think. I think I had them 8th.
I'm pretty sure I had them really high. I think I was super bullish.
Can actually look. I think I have this tab. Maybe I don't. Never mind.
Yeah, but
maybe another day we'll find it. But
we were high.
And then just one additional note relating to last week. I wanted to mention this at the top of the show, but I forgot. With the new ballots in the composite, Alabama comes in at 21, Purdue comes in at 23.
So we moved Bama up a little bit?
I don't know what the movement was, but that's our our new composite for those two.
I want to say Bama went up a little bit and Purdue went down a little bit.
Could be.
Shall we move on to Cincinnati?
Let's do it.
Okay. The synopsis, Brad.
Synopsis. Cincinnati Bearcats, 28-7, 14-4 in the American, 29th in KenPom, so one spot ahead of Villanova. They were second in the regular season American race, won the conference tournament before losing in the first round to Iowa, which was a game most people had already penciled them in winning and advancing to face Tennessee. Similar to Villanova, 338th in tempo, but they're only 28th in a turnover percentage with those seniors, Justin Jennifer, specifically handling the ball. That slow tempo went hand in hand with their big front court. I mean, they were fourth in the country in offensive rebounding percentage, 38% offensive rebounding. The national average was 28%. With between Najir Brooks, Trey Scott, Alil Nazemi, and Mamadou Diarra. I mean, they really crashed the glass. And then in a typical Cincinnati fashion, 308th in taking threes, 283rd in points off threes. They want to get to the free throw line. They want to pound it inside. And they were 50th in points off free throws. And that shouldn't change too much. Their big free throw shooter was Jarron Cumberland, who get to the line with these. Najir Brooks was a big free throw shooter, but that was for better and for worse, right? He got there a lot, only shot about 63%. The defense took a step back last year from elite when they were second in 17-18 to very good at 28. Specifically, 12th in block percentage, 20th in 2-point percentage defense. Also relates to that big front court with a shot blocker and Zemi and these two physical bigs in Scott and Brooks. Similarly, with the 2-point defense, 329th in the country in allowing points off twos, but they did give up a lot of threes, 15th in points allowed off threes. Interesting note in regard to the bench, because Cincinnati played 9 or 10 guys the whole year. Cronin was 351st in two foul participation, right? So he was the third most conservative coach in the country. Played guys in the first half with 2 fouls 1.8% of the time. The national average was 22%. John Brannen was 21% at Northern Kentucky. So he's more of a risk taker with fouls. And it's kind of the opposite of last year in terms of the Cincinnati program, where 2 years ago, Cincinnati loses 3 of his top 4, right? They lose Gary Clark. They lose Jacob Evans early. They lose Kyle Washington. Only returned Cumberland in that top 4, but they returned their whole supporting cast, and guys like Brooks and Scott and Keith Williams were able to take steps forward. This year, their top 3 scorers return, being Jarron Cumberland, Trey Scott, and Keith Williams, but the supporting cast is gone. So it'll be interesting to see if those kind of moves around the margins, make a positive impact.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing to look at with Cincinnati is you looked at a lot of those stats, the toughness, the getting downhill, the defense, the things that made Cincinnati basketball, how much of that will be the same with John Brannen as the head coach? I think we'll see a lot of the same stuff because John Brannen's a smart coach. He's not he's not so different from Mick Cronin. They play different styles. They aren't one and the same. But he's not a guy who's like, okay, we're just going to chuck a lot of threes. Like he had a big man in Drew McDonald who got the ball. He was very versatile. He could step out and shoot a little bit. He could handle the ball. He could play down low. He really did a lot of everything for the Northern Kentucky team. Did an amazing job building that program. When we talk about coaching jobs, we don't talk enough about the job. He took a job. Not only that they were moving up to D1, but they moved up. They were bad in the A-Sun for 2-3 years, and then he took the job. They moved to the Horizon right away, and not only did he make them relevant in Division I, he got them to 2 NCAA tournaments and won the Horizon League regular season in a third year. I mean, obviously a lot of credit to that goes to Drew McDonald, who he recruited and brought in and built the program around. But he now has Northern Kentucky on the map as a very good mid-major. They hired Darren Horn from Texas, a guy who's had other potential head coaching looks in the past. They got a great arena. They're recruiting at a high level. So he's a program builder. He's a really, really good coach. Happy for him to get the opportunity at Cincinnati. I think how he meshes his style and his brand of basketball with what he has returning, I think is probably the biggest central question with Cincinnati, because they have a lot of options. They've had a lot of in and a lot of out. Any thoughts on John Brannen's hire, Brad?
I thought it was a no-brainer. I mean, I think that with Matt McMahon and John Brannen sitting like in your backyard, it made too much sense to not take one of them. And then when you look at it, McMahon did a great job, right? He got John Morant, right? He got a strong supporting cast with guys like Shaq Buchanan, who's now playing in NBA Summer League. But he didn't build Murray State. I mean, they had Mick Cronin, they had Billy Kennedy, they had Steve Prohm. He didn't. They had Mark Turgeon too, I think. So he didn't build anything. Which, I mean, maybe that's a point that they should have taken him, because he's not building anything in Cincinnati either, right? He's just continuing what Cronin and Huggins have done. But what you mentioned about what Brannen did in Northern Kentucky's transition, and in the level of play that they were able to bring, I thought that made perfect sense. You really couldn't go wrong with either guy.
Yeah, I thought those were the two central candidates. What was it? Nick Van Exel was thrown in the mix there.
No, he wasn't in the mix, and like guys like Kenyon Martin were angry that he wasn't in the mix.
Okay, because that would have been terrible.
Yeah, that's like the Chris Mullen, but for no reason.
Yes, exactly. But let's look at the in and out, because this was a roster that was pretty much going to run it back. Like they were going to bring. I mean, they had a couple scholarships to fill in the spring period, but for the most part, they were going to bring back their entire core minus Kane Broom and Justin Jennifer, who are going to graduate. Instead, 7 newcomers, 7 outgoers. The Broom and Jennifer graduate as expected, but then 5 transferred out of the program. The biggest name being Nasir Brooks, as you mentioned. A very important piece for them. Played the 5. He's like an 8 and 6 guy, very athletic, can switch defensively. Finish around the rim. Not a great shooter, as you said. Rashawn Fredericks, also the JUCO transfer off to UAB. Eliel Nosimi, I don't know how to pronounce his name. I apologize. He goes to Georgia State. He transferred out of the program. LaQuill Hardnett goes to Buffalo after redshirting that year at Cincinnati. And Logan Johnson off to St. Mary's. So everyone found good landing spots, but a lot of turnover to bring in a group of 7 newcomers. I thought John Brannen did a tremendous job of balancing out these classes. It's very difficult when you take over a job like that. And you have a lot of turnover, especially late. That coaching search went on a little bit, and then because it started late, first of all, because Cronin took the UCLA job a little late, and then it took some time, and then it was a transfer out of the program. He got a late start and was able to really salvage things. He grabs 3 grad transfers, and Jarron Cumberland, the biggest name out of Oakland, a shooter who can also do a little bit of playmaking, really more of a secondary creator and ball mover. Jaume Sorolla from Valpo, just a very solid piece. He's a 7-footer, can protect the rim a little bit, probably a bench big for this team. And then Chris McNeil comes from Tennessee Tech. He's had a very weird journey from Pitt to JUCO to New Mexico to Tennessee Tech to now Cincinnati, his 5th school in 5 years. He's like an undersized combo guard. He's not really a true point, but he can do a little bit of he can handle the ball. He can shoot the ball as well. So very valuable there. They grab a sit-out transfer in Chris Vogt, who is a big guy who can protect the rim. You're not a super high upside guy in my mind, but the redshirt year will do well for him. I think he fits kind of the toughness mold that Cincinnati basketball will maintain under Brannen. And then 3 freshmen coming into the program, a top 50 recruit in Zach Harvey, who was going to reclass at 2020. He comes back to the 19 class and signs with Cincinnati. He had some legal trouble that had stunted his recruitment, but that is behind him. He is a talented kid who could play on the wing. Mika Adams-Woods, the former Nebraska signee out of New Hampton School. He's a point guard who could play on or off the ball. Good size for the position. Probably more of a developmental piece, but a guy they needed when they weren't sure what they were going to do at point guard before they got McNeil and before they got Harvey. They just needed backcourt help, as well as Jarron Cumberland, who hadn't committed yet. So they definitely needed him. And then finally, Jeremiah Davenport out of Hargrave. He's a 6'7" wing. They needed wing depth. He fits the mold. So much credit to John Brannen for filling out the roster in a way that both makes sense in the short term and the long term. And now I'm going to take a breath because I've been talking for quite some time.
Okay, rotation time. For the starters, I have Jarron Cumberland at the 1, Javen at the 2, Keith Williams at the 3, Trey Scott at the 4, and then Sorolla at the 5. I think that what they could do here is, that would be the nominal starting lineup. But then I think the most frequent lineup could either have like a Chris McNeil in there playing point guard and Sorolla on the bench, or you keep Jarron as like the primary playmaker, and you can add like a Trevor Moore in there or a Zach Harvey and go small. Or Mamadou Diarra is a guy who played more late for them. He's a big time athlete. I think he'll see a bigger role this year. He can play that small ball 5 spot. He can play the 4 next to Scott as well. So I think that they have a lot of different options that they can go with here. But I really like this 3-man group of Cumberland, and Williams. You have Jarron, who can attack. He's one of the best players in the country. Right, he can get to the free throw line. He can score at all 3 levels. You have Javen, who can run off screens, who can shoot, who can spot up. And Williams is like your kind of tough, gritty wing who can slash and defend.
Yeah, I think the big question is how comfortable is John Brannen going small, and how much does he want to go big? Because to me, I think their best lineup next year is, if Jarron Cumberland here on the show, it's Jarron Cumberland, Javen Cumberland, Zach Harvey, Keith Williams, and Trey Scott. Because 1 through 4, it's none of them are big guys in terms of height, but they all have like big enough bodies, especially Jarron Cumberland and Keith Williams, to guard 3s and 4s without a problem. They can all shoot the ball. Williams isn't a great shooter, but he can step out a little bit. They can all handle the ball. They can all slash. That is a very appealing lineup to go 1 through 4 with, and then Trey Scott at the 5. But like you said, there's a ton of options because they could play either Diarra or Sorolla at the 5 and move Scott down to the 4. I guess who's the 4, who's the 5 if you're playing Diarra and Scott? I don't really know. Chris McNeil could play point guard. Trevor Moore is a guy who you mentioned who could potentially slot in. And then there's kind of this other X factor being Prince Gilliam, who redshirted last year. He's like a true 4-man. I watched him play an AAU game 2 years ago when Northwestern was like briefly recruiting him before he decided to reclassify up and do the redshirt year. He's an interesting guy. He's athletic. He's a beast around the rim. He put up really good numbers in the UIBL. I don't know if he's going to play because there's not really a ton of room for minutes, especially depending on how they want to play these lineups. But he's an interesting long-term piece, as well as Adams Woods, who I've been monitoring for quite some time as a member of the City Rocks.
Yeah, The three words that come to mind for me are athletic, energy, and raw. He's like super active around the rim, not super skilled, but he'll be productive, and he's a very Cincinnati type player. I think he's probably a year away from playing there. For me, rounding out that top 9 of the rotation, I think Trevor Moore. I mean, every team has the shooter who can't shoot, right? He's billed as a shooter, shoots mostly threes, only shot like 28% from three. But I mean, we've seen time and time again guys in that mold takes a year or two under their belt before the shots start falling. So this is really a make or break year for Moore, and I think he'll start hitting. I mean, you look at guys like Trevor Cooney, guys, Providence fan, Jane Lindsay and Josh Fortune, similar ways too, where they're billed as a shooter. You kind of force feed them minutes. You live with the misses when they're younger in a smaller role, and then when they're upperclassmen, they start hitting. So I think Moore is going to be an important piece for them. I think, and then Diarra, Zach Harvey, and Chris McNeil.
Yeah, I can buy that. I think Harvey's an interesting guy because on paper he brings a lot to the table that this team needed, like another guy who you could trust to get a bucket. And pulling his AAU stats right now, playing on the Under Armour circuit. One thing with AAU stats being that you always have to kind of take them in stride because you have to understand basically what they're surrounded with. But he averaged 18 points a game, shot 45% from three, 55% from the field, and then was a pretty good defensive playmaker. Averaged 1.6 steals a game. He turned it over a little bit too much. Had a negative assist turnover ratio. But he's a guy who can shoot the ball, which they need, because I think him or Trevor Moore really has to provide that shooting, especially behind Jarron Cumberland.
I think McNeil could shoot a little bit too. I'm not sure how much he plays. I mean, he was fine, right, at New Mexico.
Right. He was playing out of necessity, though. Like, they didn't have any guys.
Yeah. Yeah, I think 10 to 12 minutes for McNeil seems about right.
I think it really depends on how Cumberland looks at the point guard spot, right? Because if Cumberland isn't comfortable initiating, that's the main question for me. If he struggles to run offense, because we've talked about like the Western Kentucky team playing Josh Anderson at point guard and they just miss Bassie all the time, or like Northwestern this past season just didn't really get into their offense a lot with Thicklaw playing point guard. If we see kind of the similar thing happen with Jarron Cumberland, you play McNeil because he's a better option than that.
Agree, and I think an interesting note about their kind of change in bench, right, which is completely flipped over. Like the whole supporting cast has been changed out. And I liked guys like Rashawn Fredericks and Logan Johnson and Nozemi. Especially Johnson. I thought he had great upside. I thought Fredericks was a really nice like combo forward, versatile guy off the bench. Nozemi is like a rim protector and is like a defensive force there. Like they had like their 6 guys last year that they used, like the starters, and then Broom and Jennifer kind of splitting that point guard spot. They played more together as seniors than they did the year prior. Like all these guys like Fredericks, Moore, Diarra, Johnson, and Nozemi all averaged like 7 to 11 minutes a game. They were really just used between like force feeding the younger guys the minutes and just as like relief, right? Like they weren't really integrated. If that makes sense, like there was a clear 6, and everyone else was just kind of a hanger on. It'll be interesting this year because I think that this roster looks like that they could use that top 8, and guys like Moore and Harvey could see closer to like 18 minutes a game as opposed to the Moore and Johnson last year who played like 12 and 7 minutes respectively.
Yes. And one thing I just remembered, Brad, just kind of touching on the Jarron Cumberland situation at point guard, when looking at Northern Kentucky, was they kind of played a similar situation where they had a initiator in Jalen Tate, who's like a 6'6" wing, and then a smaller guard in Zayna Robinson, who could handle the ball, was kind of playing more like a 2-guard role. So I think it's possible we see some of those similar looks with Cumberland initiating, but McNeil playing off the ball as like a shooter. We could see that, or also just like the general allowance of maybe not a true point guard initiating a lot of offense, which is what they did with Jalen Tate.
Yeah, that's a good point there, because like I said, looking at past Cincinnati teams with Cronin, because this is a whole different animal. But I think the Cumberland backcourt, I think that has some serious potential. I think that gives the team the necessary shooting. And for me, in terms of the strengths, I mean, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but I mean, you have one of the best players in the country with Jarron Cumberland. He's probably a top 10 player in the country, if not top 15. You ranked him as the second best shooting guard behind Myles Powell. The roster has plenty of options and the ability to go big or small, or even medium with the Scott Diarra front court, which we touched on earlier. And I think their defense should still be very good. Obviously, different coach, so could be a different system and stuff. But you have a rim protector and Soroya. Guys like Scott, Williams, Cumberland were part of this great Cincinnati culture in terms of defense. Previously, Diarra should be a good defender. So I think that the defense should still be good, even if it takes a step back.
Yeah, we must have the same notes again, Brad, because my strengths that I wrote down before the podcast were potential for an elite backcourt, top-end star in Jarron Cumberland, ability to go big or small, defensive potential. This is getting a little creepy.
Should we go to the key questions, see if we have the same key questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, my number one. If Cronin and all eligible players returned, Cincinnati was a top 10 team. How will Brannen adjust with this newly made group?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote new coach. What does it look like? Question mark. So.
And there's no way to really know. I mean, you touched on their point guard situation at Northern Kentucky, and Cincinnati is no longer a top 10 team in my opinion. Maybe if Brooks came back, maybe if they got one or two of those bench pieces back, then maybe. But the drop off in those cases, and then the coaching change, I think, pushes them down quite a bit. Second question: Cincinnati struggled with point guard play 2 seasons ago, but was able to mask it with their defensive prowess. Last year, the point guard play was solidified with their two seniors. Where do the Javen McNeil Adams Woods combo bring Cincinnati in terms, or I guess Jarron McNeil and Adams Woods bring Cincinnati in terms of point guard play?
Yeah, I wrote point guard questions. Can Jarron initiate? Because I mean that to me is really the question, because we know he can create shots and we know he can handle the ball. Like we've seen that he was like Justin Jennifer was not a ball dominant guy. Like Jarron Cumberland held the ball a lot, but can he make the right pass, be the calming force that they're going to need? Because Justin Jennifer, while he didn't put up massive numbers, was super valuable because he hit big shots. He was steady with the ball, took care of the basketball. Was the calming force on this team that they really needed. I don't know if a guy who's never played point guard before is going to be that guy, especially a guy like Cumberland who's so wired to attack. Like we see him, he's such a downhill force. He's a guy who wants to go get a shot at all times. Can he revert into more of a ball handling, distributing role? Can he let the game come to him? I think those are legitimate questions, and I think Adams Woods is very good. I don't know if he's good enough to be like a 20-minute game point guard on a team that's good as a freshman, but I think he's talented, and I think he's like a stat sheet stuffer. He averaged like 16, 5, and 7 at New Hampton School, which is a really good prep school. So I think he has the upside to contribute. Certainly there. It's just a question of he's the only true point guard on the roster. How much is he used? I don't think he will be used a lot. I think it will be Jarron and it will be McNeil splitting up those minutes. And if Adams Woods has to play a lot, that's a bad sign.
Yeah, I think Gilliam, Adams Woods, and Davenport are the three odd men out of the rotation this year.
Interesting. I have Davenport in the rotation, just because I think they could use like combo forward type, like a guy who could defend multiple positions, shoot the three, maybe like more than Gilliam, because Gilliam isn't necessarily like a shooter, as we've said. I think he could get minutes at the 3. But with their lineup versatility, maybe that doesn't matter as much, and you bring DR into the rotation.
So what was your full rotation again?
It was Cumberland, Harvey, Williams, Scott as the starters, and McNeil, Moore, Davenport, and Soroya off the bench with DR as the 10th man. But that could be flipped in depending on with Davenport. Davenport was 9, DR was 10.
Okay, I had, as we just touched on, Gilliam, Adams, Woods, and Davenport are the odd men out for me. Had Soroya in a starting lineup instead of Harvey. My only difference is from you. Third question for me. Since he returns their top 3 scorers, most of the remainder of the team's turnover. Has Brannen's offseason moves made enough improvements around the margins for the Bearcats?
I think they have made enough improvements around the margins. I just don't know how they'll fit together. Because on paper they fit together, and I think on paper the talent's there. But there's something to be said for how do you balance. Well, not even how do you balance, but how do you incorporate all these new guys? Jarron Cumberland was one of the guys at Oakland. He was a star. He's not going to be that here. Zach Harvey's a freshman. Incorporating college basketball. Trey Scott might have to play more 5. McNeil's a guy who's always had license to shoot the ball. How does he fit in? Like the good thing is they brought in guys who know how to play a role. Jarron Cumberland can be a guy who just shoots the ball. I think that's very valuable to not have a grad transfer. Like I think one of the things you overrate with grad transfers, like a mid-major kid who can score the ball, like those are dime a dozen. But if you have an elite shooter, that can fit in as an elite shooter, and I think Jarron Cumberland can be an elite shooter. Soroya, he is a role player. He is a good size rim protector, gives you some fouls, finish around the rim. Like that's all he wants to be. He's not trying to be anything else. I think that's beneficial. Harvey, good shooter. How does he mesh in? I think that's a legit question. But like they brought in a bunch of guys who are ready-made role players, so I think piecing together things is a little easier. But it's still a question of how do all those pieces mold as one, especially with a new coach trying to build a culture. I think that could create some early season struggles.
For the final question for me, can Soroya or a small lineup have the same defensive impact as when Brooks was at the 5 last year?
I don't think they can.
I don't either.
But I think the offense has a chance to be better.
Agreed. Yeah, because we don't really know how good like Harvey or Cumberland are defensively, really, and even some of these guys in like lesser roles like Moore and Diarra. Like I think Diarra will be good defensively. Moore, I just don't. I don't know. He played a fair amount as the shooter. We'll see if he can kind of guard more too. I've never really noticed his defense last season. Where do you have Cincinnati overall?
So I have them outside the top 25. I think they clearly have the potential to be in the top 25. I have them as a definite tournament team. I have them top 40 behind Houston if Grimes gets a waiver, above Houston if Grimes does not get a waiver, and Memphis number 1 in the AAC.
I have the same. Third in the AAC because I am convinced that Quentin Grimes will get a waiver. I've only solidified my top 25, but I have kind of rough estimates on my top 100 so far, and I have Cincinnati at 36 right now, tentatively, which would put them as like a 9 seed. Maybe they fall to a 10 seed there. Third in the American, and to go from 29th in KenPom to 36th with a new coach and all these changes, I think that's pretty much what the expectation should be for Cincinnati. Like if they finish 36th, I think that shouldn't be seen as like a failure by any means this year. And then no one has them in the composite.
Yeah, I think that's about right. I think with a new coach, with such a new roster, it's tough to project anything more than that. But the talent is there to be a top 25 team. They have a top level star, as we've said. They have the role players to kind of make it work. We'll see if they can all put it together.
That's it on Cincinnati.
Yes, we have to do our state of the program, of course. So state of the program, new head coach. We both like the hire. Good new arena that will help. The American Conference in a bit of flux, but they're an elite program in that league. And then kind of looking long term, just the roster. I thought, as I've said, I thought Brannen did a nice job of leaving himself enough flexibility for the future that he could, bring in his recruits. Landing a top 50 kid late in the process in Zach Harvey is certainly a good sign. And he brought in some developmental pieces in Davenport and Mika Adams-Woods that help as well. So I think overall, he's done a nice job positioning himself for the future, developing for this year, and then he's a good recruiter. He's got a good staff. I think he will do well. Certainly, we don't have to talk about a coach being on the hot seat here. He has plenty of time to build this thing and try to keep it rolling.
They have some work to do for next year in terms of recruiting because they're losing Jarron Cumberland, Chris McNeil, Jarron Cumberland, Trey Scott, and Soroya. So they're losing 5 guys. They have Mike Saunders, who I think is like a top 200 recruit, point guard coming in. They are going to need a grad transfer point guard for next year because it's only Adams Woods as a sophomore and Saunders. So I expect them to be active in that grad transfer market next year. They're going to need another big man behind Chris Voigt. Chris Voigt, a 2020 recruit, will probably do there. And then just best available, trying to upgrade wherever they can. Including the Saunders addition, they should have 4 open scholarships for 2020.
Yes. Trying to find some of their other targets for that class. I know they offered, I believe his name is Gabe Madsen today. Oh, he's like a Minnesota kid. So he's the one to watch. They want Jaden Scrub for the JUCO kid. He might go pro right out of JUCO. He also is like a Louisville lean, so that's unlikely. They wanted Andre Jackson. He's not going to Cincinnati now that Cronin is gone. So it's kind of hard to say. Their 24/7 page is pretty unclear as to who they're recruiting, partially because it's unclear as to who was recruited by Brannen, who was recruited by Cronin. So I don't want to make too many sweeping assumptions as to who they are most involved with.
Let's take a look at their verbal commits page, see if I recognize any names and interest. So they have Saunders in the mix there. I see Madsen, like you mentioned. Jackson ship has sailed. I don't really know where they stand with these guys. I think I saw them mention with Zach Loveday.
Yes.
Not sure that's like a likely scenario, but I think I've at least seen them mentioned. Zed Key's blowing up a little bit. Jalen Gibson's a center. I know Providence offered him early. I'm not sure where he is on Providence's board, but he's starting to get high majors trickling in. Elijah Taylor's stock is rising of late, and for ours too. Don't think they're going to get Donovan Johnson or Josh Hall. Kadari Richmond for Mass Rivals, his stock is rising. So that's a reasonable guy. Again, we don't really know where they stand. Darius Maddox, I know that Seton Hall has a crystal ball for him. And then Galloway and Leal are both Indiana leans. Matthew Murrell, I saw he has top 4 of like Northwestern or of Creighton, Minnesota, Vanderbilt, and Virginia Tech. And they already have Saunders. I don't know if they'll get like Shaquille Moore or anything at point.
Yeah, I think they're gonna have a lot of work to do to build this class out. But Brandon's a good recruiter. He got some guys to commit to Northern Kentucky when it was nothing and build it from the ground up. I think he'll do well, kind of locking down kids in Cincinnati. They're not going to be. I don't think they're going to be like a program that consistently fights for blue chip guys. I think they're going to be that blue collar mentality, those multi-year program guys, and Harvey might wind up being one of their higher rated recruits for a while because he is, highly touted. Partially kept his recruitment down because of those legal issues, and partially because he was going to go 2021. So, big foundational piece for them there. But I believe that wraps us up for Cincinnati. Top 40 team. We had Villanova as a top 20 team. Thought nationally, Cincinnati was right where we expected them to be. Villanova a little bit too highly rated. And we'll be back next week with another deep dive, another two teams to touch on, and kind of keep the offseason chugging. One thing to watch is throughout the week, I will be releasing my mid-major positional rankings, something I'm always excited to do. You guys love it. I love it too. So check that out. Brad's been pumping out great content on his Twitter as well. So check that out, and we'll see you next week.